A couple of things before we get started. You may or may not have noticed it's really cold in here. And I've decided that is really just a beginning of Lent. We're sacrificing by not having heat. The reality is the heat in the sanctuary is currently not working today. So we're all friends here. Cuddle up. Get a cup of coffee. It's delicious. It's amazing. Let it be known, our coffee is delicious. So with that being said, it is the first Sunday in Lent. Happy Lent. So you will notice a few changes in our service. One, I changed my get up for this season because, I have a cassock and surplice and choir dress, so why not wear it? So we Anglican up for Lent around here. And you'll notice a few other changes in the service. And so as we begin this season of Lent, let's talk a little bit about Lent and what exactly that's all about, because it can be really tempting for us to see Lent in an incredibly depressing way, where it is just we are but worms and just horrible awfulness and really dirgy. Prepare yourself, you're probably not going to like the music for the next few weeks. I can't do anything about that. Sorry, that's the way it is. And yet, that's not really the entire point of Lent. So Lent is a season set aside to prepare us for Easter, which is kind of a big deal. Like, we built an entire faith around it. It's kind of a big deal. And so we have this understanding that you can't just show up and Easter just happens. It's something that you must prepare for. In the same way that Jesus had to prepare for that moment, we too must prepare. And so it mimics the 40 days in the wilderness. So it's the 40 days of Lent. Now here's a little secret I'm going to tell you. For those of you who gave something up that's really, really hard to give up, Sundays are always Easter. Sunday is always an Easter celebration. Always, 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 Lent or no. And so, Sundays don't count in the 40 days. In fact, if you do the math, you'll notice Sundays don't count. So, from sun up to sundown today, you're free. You be you. Yeah, I know, right? Everyone's like, yes! So that's a little secret of Lent. We have a little forgiveness built in. So Sundays, you be you. But come nightfall, you got to switch back. But it's a time of preparation, and it mimics Jesus' time in the wilderness. Now, in classic Markan form, Mark is he's the king of brevity, if you will. Where John really, really likes to expand on things and make it poetic and beautiful. Mark is more of so this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. That's Mark. And in class, so every first Sunday of Lent, we talk about the temptation of Christ. Every single one. Every year. This is literally the same sermon every year. But it's okay, you got a whole year to forget it, so it's fine. But in classic Markan form, Mark keeps it very, very short. And so it goes something like this. Jesus was baptized. Jesus went into the wilderness. Jesus started his ministry. It's kind of super short, super collapsed. Like I said, king of brevity. And yet, I think it's really important that we see those three things in a unification because they all come together. And that's really, really important. So it can be really tempting when we read the baptism of Jesus to make it very sweet and lovely because, the Spirit comes down as the dove and lands on Jesus, kind of like a little butterfly on a flower. And it's really sweet and nice. And God says, oh, Jesus, I'm so happy that you finally showed up to do ministry. Yay, now that you're in your 30s. What have you been doing for 20 years? But he says in a very God way, Jesus, I'm so happy you're here, and I'm so proud of you. The reality of this text is not quite the Anglicanized version that we have. It's, instead of a dove, think more like a hawk going after a rabbit. So Jesus comes up out of the water because he's finally shown up to do ministry. Seriously, like he was born Christ. What has he been doing for 22 years? I don't know, but it wasn't ministry. I'm sure it was good, whatever it was. I have a hunch there are good stories there. And if you're not sure, someday look up the Gnostic Gospels of Thomas. Awesome. Awesome, life-changing. Sometime I'll read some of them to you. Probably not today, though, because we're already trying to hope that I don't get hit by lightning during sermons. So we won't do Gnostic Gospels today. So, but really it's more like this. And so the sky opens, and God is like, seriously, finally? And he sends the bird. The bird goes, bam! And we pick him up, and we send him into the wilderness. That's really more of how this goes. And if you're honest about your Christian faith, that's probably more likely the way it feels sometimes than like sweet little butterfly dancing on flowers, right? Does it feel like sometimes God is like, bam! And you're like, oh, crap. Okay, so the reality is, baptism is not the entrance into perfection. It is not all good and easy from here on out. Baptism is the entry into our ministry. And to do ministry, to do what we are called to do, we must go through a period of preparation. You must. And the reality is that period of preparation is going to be painful. Because in that time, you must look into yourself and figure out who you really are, and you must wrestle with those demons that are within. And the reality is, most of those times, demons aren't out there. The demons are within us. We always want it to be external, don't we? We always want Satan to be something out there, something that we can fight out there against. But the reality is, and when we talk about some of the temptations where we get more in depth, we'll talk about what some of those actually are. This time around, Mark is really just like, oh, well, Jesus was tempted, and he had to wrestle with this stuff. So we don't get really specific into what it was that he was wrestling with. And I think that's okay, because the reality is sometimes we can get so focused on what Jesus was wrestling with that we get to ignore the stuff that we need to wrestle with. But the reality is we must go through this period, because self-awareness is one of the most painful and yet freeing things that we will ever deal with. We must do it to equip ourselves to actually do the work that we are called to do. And even Jesus struggles with that time. But it is so centrally important to who we are and to what we are called to do. You cannot do ministry, you cannot do in your life what you are called to do if you've never wrestled with the stuff within. If you've never come face to face with all that stuff that we are, and if you don't know it, and if you can't deal with it, you're not equipped to deal with the stuff that's out there. You're just not. And so we do it willingly in Lent. Because most of life, we do not do this stuff willingly, right? Most of the time, it feels like, bam, the hawk is after the rabbit. And guys, we feel like we're the rabbit. Anyone ever feel like you're the rabbit? Totally feel like I'm the rabbit some days. But in Lent, we walk into that willingly, knowingly. We are welcoming that face-to-face temptation, that face-to-face knowledge of who we truly are and the things that we've got to wrestle with to be equipped to do the other things that we must do. Do you feel like I need to explain this at some point? I'll explain it eventually. Right now we're going to deal with the sermon, then I'll explain that because I understand that it's probably distracting to some of you. Okay, so in Lent, we do this with full knowledge that we are about to do this. So as you are preparing for Lent, because chances are, I'm assuming for some of you, you showed up today and didn't realize that it was Lent. Don't raise your hands. I'm not going to call you out. But I'm guessing that there are people who are like, oh, crap, it's Lent. Totally missed that. Gosh, it's early this year. Yeah, don't raise your hands. It's fine. I'm not going to call you out. But it's okay, because you still have time. Because the reality is, it's not about doing something that is a chore for you. It might be. It's not about doing something where you feel completely alone and isolated and away from God. It's about doing something that refocuses us, that helps us return to a focus on God. Does that make sense? Because sometimes in Lent, we get so into the dirginess of it and the like, we are but worms thing. So it's like, oh, I'm not going to do this because it's going to make me really sad and depressed and I'm a horrible human, right? Sometimes. All the Roman Catholics here are going, yeah, that was totally growing up. It's okay, I can say that because I went to Roman Catholic schools. I know what it's like, y'all. But that's really not the point of Lent at all. The point of Lent is to realize that we cannot do these things alone. That even in our deepest, darkest pits, God is with us. And that even when we are focusing on those things that are super hard for us, God is there doing it with us. We don't face those things alone. That's the point of Lent. So I invite you, as you get ready to enter into this Lenten period, that you be willing to actually do that, to trust that, yes, you're going to see things and wrestle with things that you really wish you didn't have to. Things that are really, really uncomfortable. But know that you do not do that alone, that you do that guided by God. Also know that Lent ends, that season of the wilderness ends. And as that ends, we are equipped to go out and do the work that we are called to do. Because Lent isn't about feeling bad about yourself. You might sometimes, but it's not about that. What Lent is about preparing us to do the work that we are called to do. So trust. Trust that these 40 days, minus the Sundays off, these days are going to be worth it. Because in them we are going to grow. And in that growth, we are going to be equipped to do the work that we are called to do. Okay, this thing right here. So I got my grant. So excited. So how many of you are familiar that we record the sermons? It's literally the only reason I agree to be mic'd. Okay, so we record the sermons, but they've always been audio only. And as y'all are familiar, I tend to move a lot and gesticulate a lot and do other things a lot, usually not be prepared a lot. And so we decided to try and video the sermons. So the sermons will now not be audio only, they will also have video along with them. And we're also working on streaming the entire service. So this is not permission, mind you. If you think it's permission, I'm going to put a PayPal button right next to it. So it's not permission. But if you are traveling or you cannot be here, I will put a little card swipe thing right in the seats in front of you. Then you'll be able to get the service and the sermon and things online. Or if I say something, you're like, oh, that was weird. I really want to listen to that again. Or you're like, hey, I really like that. I'd like to share that with a friend that I passively aggressively disagree with, but Bang actually agreed with me this week. Don't say that you haven't done that. You've done it. I've done it. You can do that. So that we are testing it because the camera, we're waiting for an upgrade on it. So we're testing it this week here, but it will not be so obvious most weeks. It will be back there and you won't have to worry about it. Does that all make sense? All right. I feel like I should say something catchy, because I like to end the sermons on something catchy, but I ain't got no catchy.